Now, the State Capture Commission of Inquiry this week heard how former President Jacob Zuma, ministers and the Guptas interfered with the board of Eskom in exercising its fiduciary duty. The commission heard from former Eskom Board Chairperson Zola, Tsotsi, who said that he received a call from former President Zuma requesting him to postpone an Eskom meeting. And they also heard how former SAA Chair Dudu Myeni convened a meeting and made decisions from Zuma KZN residents proposing a suspension of executives in 2015. And in yet more testimony this week, a former Eskom board member, Venete Klein, told of her discomfort when she saw her name on an organogram connected to a minister, Rooyen, that she had never heard of, and being unhappy to be appointed in what was referred to as the Gupta board. Now, to discuss these developments further, we're joined by Professor Bonang Mohale, who is a Chancellor of the University of the Free State, also Professor at the Johannesburg Business School and Chairperson of Bidvest Group. Thanks so much for your time. Welcome to Morning Live, Professor.
Thank you for having me, my dear.
So, firstly, some of the moments that stood out for you from the Zondo Commission this week.
So first, I think we need to remember that this is one of only 4 commissions of inquiry that were instituted by President Madam Cyril Ramaphosa, immediately taking over, of course, from the former President Jacob Zuma. So the first was looking into Lawrence Mukhwebi and Nomgcobo Jiba's fitness to hold office. The second was looking into the shenanigans that were going on in the biggest asset manager in the continent, the PIC. The third was into Tom Moyane's South African Revenue Service, one of our finest institutions, probably in the top 10 revenue collection agencies in the world. And of course, now the Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo's commission. And all of them, the common denominator and the silver thread is the depth and the width of state capture, how people were looting at an industrial scale, how we were literally stealing from the poor, from the hungry, from the sick and the dying. That these people that we call our leaders, that we put into office so that they can give us just basic service delivery and make sure that we reverse the legacy of apartheid, in fact, are self-serving. They are simply wanting to steal, and we thought that they were so different from the precedent that was set in the continent, and how wrong we were, my dear sister. Back to you.
So, looking at the evidence that came out of the commission this week, we've heard all of this before. We remember Parliament itself undertook an exercise, a commission, to actually understand what had happened at Eskom. So, how and when do we start moving forward with regard to these allegations?
This is the part that's disappointing, because for the last 11 years, we've been talking about state capture, and yet up until today, there's not a single top state capture miscreant that has been sent to jail. And really what is disappointing is, especially at Eskom, it's one of more than 740 state-owned enterprises and state-owned companies. And here we see evidence being laid bare about how a sitting president, whose job it is not to interfere, to instruct chairpersons, but secondly, it shows you the choice of people that we're bringing onto this board. Remember, the way state capture works is you repurpose these state-owned enterprises. Number 2, you get rid of the good people who know, technically competent, what is it that is supposed to be happening. You bring in people that can only bear loyalty to the person who's appointing them at that time, not even to government, not even to the party. Their intention being really to feed at the trough. Now, when you hear evidence of somebody who's had a surprise 40th birthday party, and the question is asked, who paid for it? And somebody say, I don't remember. How is that possible? And now you hear a sitting chairperson saying, Actually, I was phoned by the president to postpone an Eskom board meeting. I mean, what has a sitting president got to do? Because this thing called fiduciary responsibilities definition in the documents like Companies Act, King 4, but PFMA in particular, it says it's acting in the best interest of the entity, and not in the interest of the shareholder, nor the interest of the employees. It behooves us to act with the duty of care, skill, and diligence, but most importantly, the duty of care. Now, here we are, the president and the president's associate running the board of Eskom from the residents, and yet we know that, especially Eskom, energy is the fourth means of production. Now we are being reduced to a nation of consumers, not of producers, where the majority of our people are now on some sort of social security net rather than having their self-worth and self-respect and indeed having a meaningful job. Lastly, I think for me, more than anything else, it's about saying, how do we ensure that we resuscitate this economy, first and foremost, to ensure that we defeat and root out the state capture, because the evidence is everywhere. We are encouraged by the fact that the president has said, now the evidence that come out of these 4 commissions, we don't have to wait long, can indeed be used in a court of law. For many years, we have heard leaders saying, but I've not been found guilty by a court of law. In fact, I'm presumed innocent until proven guilty. Again, it's a misuse of this legal prescript that happens only in a court of law. If you are a leader, the highest standard is that of morality, of conscience, of the choices that we make, anchored in principles and in wholesome intent, not the lowest denominator, because we know even the law itself is not a moral compass. It is indeed possible to be legally right and yet so morally wrong, because we know that the people who hid both Anne Frank and Bantu Steve Biko were breaking the law, but the policemen who killed them both were obeying and indeed following the law. So I think as South Africans, as civil society, as all the 4 social partners, it's about time that we say, not in our name. Somebody needs to go to the other Sun City where they will be wearing orange overalls, because it can be that in 4 years, this economy has lost 1.4 trillion South African rands. That's 2/3 of what it takes us to collect in a year. That every year in the last 9 wasted years, we have been siphoning off about 100 billion South African rands just to the 2 Gupta families. And yet in rural schools, our children are still subjected to pit latrine toilets. That in Eastern Cape, we still don't have water. Now we've been hit by the pandemic. We can't even wash our hands just for 20 seconds with soap. We can't even practice social distancing, self-quarantine. And how do we even start working from home when only 10.4% of the population have access, direct access to the internet? Back to you, my dear sister.
Professor Mohale, how important is it, though, to have absolutely honest conversations if we are going to fix this? You're absolutely right that it is evident that there was a problem with the Gupta brothers in terms of siphoning money out of this country and out of this economy. However, that did not start with the Guptas. It did not end with the Guptas. What about everybody else? Because I think what's important is that you cannot have holy cows here. Everybody and anybody who has done any wrong should be held to account. We cannot gun for certain people because it's convenient and leave others out because, we like them at any given point in time. Because from what you are saying, when we're talking about morals and ethics, let's go through who was at Eskom at the time. What was their involvement, and have they been held accountable? You look at the War Room, 2015. Now President Ramaphosa was appointed by former president to actually head that up at Eskom to try and turn the entity around. Why are we not talking about the involvement of all concerned?
You are absolutely correct. You see, we should not only have crucial, critical, but courageous conversations. It is useful when you find and you catch people red-handed stealing to start with those first and foremost, to send a message that says, this is not on. Thereafter, you then go back and say, but who else was doing this? So when you jump a fence as a small boy and you steal apricots from your neighbor's yard and you get caught, you can't say, but we've been doing this for the last 20 years. Because how then do we start? Do we go back to 1652 with Jan van Riebeck? Do we go back to Sarafina with Mbongeni Ngema and the abstain, be faithful and condomize? Do we go back to the arms deal, which we used to call the strategic procurement at that time? But I think as a people with great natural endowment, we have to start with the people that have really taken the PPE during the time of the pandemic. The people who charged 10 times more the price of what National Treasury has indeed authorized. We need to go back to the people that went to Eskom and say, your job was to make sure that we give access to electricity to the majority of our people so that we increase our productivity, because our challenge is, number one, how do we ensure that we survive the pandemic? Number two, how do we ensure that we bring about this notion of shared value, where the most critical challenge confronting boards, governments, and business today is to ensure that decision-making is consistent not only with the shareholders, but a much broader stakeholder community. That number three, how do we ensure that this economy grows? Because if we don't have growth, very soon we'll be talking about the redistribution of poverty, not the redistribution of wealth. Fourthly, how do we ensure that this economy looks like you and I, this notion of transformation, where 51% of the population is female and women's representations in positions of leadership is only 24%. African women, 4%. How do we ensure that we create jobs in large numbers to have this oversized and outsized impact? Because when we create jobs, we're actually creating the markets of the future. How do we ensure that our own children, nieces and nephews, get access to good quality education? Because when one steadily burns the midnight oil, one gains access to the domain of knowledge and wisdom, the world of meaning, the world that has no frontiers, the world that cannot be conquered without a persistent crusade. That when your kids are sick and unwell, can we send them to a hospital, not where they are going to die, but where they are indeed going to get well? I think as South Africans, we need to look our leaders in the eye and say we demand ethical leadership. That number two, we demand absolute transparency. That lastly, we want this notion called final accountability. Anyone that did things that they should not be doing, from PRASA to Transnet to South African Airways, if you have taken money, you have taken assets that don't belong to you, not only should you go to jail, you should be sued in your personal capacity, you should lose the last jacket off your back. In fact, we must go and recover the ill-gotten gains. That's why we have the Asset Forfeiture Unit. That's why we have the SIU. That's why when people came back from Polokwane in 2017, instead of worrying about service delivery and transformation and growth and creating jobs, the first thing they did was to close the Scorpions, because they knew that they are guilty as hell, that the Scorpions was going to come after them. Now, as South Africans, we need to say we have learned from the rest of the continent. Our leaders having spent 27 years in Robben Island, we thought they were incorrigible and therefore uncorruptible. I mean, how wrong we were. We knew that they didn't have the requisite skills to run SAA, but we put them in the pilot seat and say, fly this Airbus or Boeing 747-400 from OR Tambo to London Heathrow, a distance of 14,500 kilometers with no skills, sitting on 192,000 liters of fuel, 3 swimming pool fulls, almost 388 passengers, 38 crew members. If we did that today, we'll be sending our people to sure death. But that's what we did in Transnet when we bought 1,064 locomotives, budgeted at 32 billion South African rand, and we said it includes everything. Foreign exchange. We even threw the kitchen sink. When it ballooned by 16 billion, nobody asked the questions.
Well, those things are still continuing, I would argue. At certain SOEs, Professor Mohale, all of these things are still happening. You still have the cost overruns at Kusile, at Medupi, yet companies are being paid billions of rands to supply engineering skills, and things break down all the time. So what exactly are we paying for? Who's being held accountable for that? So these things seem to be ongoing. And even when you listen to the testimony of interference with the board at Eskom from Zola Tsotsi, last year you had, again, board member at Eskom making the same scathing comment in Parliament regarding interference of the shareholder, which happened to be Minister Gordhan, according to the board member, blocking the board from acting. And that, they said, caused at the time a delay in dealing with load shedding. So these things seem to be ongoing, Professor Mohale. How then? You say we should try and pull this back from the brink as South Africans, but how?
I think we have to start somewhere. And I think the starting somewhere says, how is it that Eskom could have a budget of 2 billion rands for diesel for the emergency supply of electricity using open cycle gas turbines? In that year, that figure, actual spend, is 10 billion. And the reason is simple. It's because some of the politicians themselves, through nominee systems, actually have these deals to themselves. Therefore, in fact, you've got a perverse incentive. We didn't learn from the fact that in Nigeria, some of the ministers own generator companies. Therefore, they've got no vested interest in the seamless supply of electricity because they make the most money when there is indeed interruption. Secondly, I think we need to say, how is it that in Kusile and Midupi, and we should include mighty Ingula, 3 electricity generations units that we're building, amongst the 4th biggest in the world, that we are more than 6 years late, the costs have almost doubled, we know the culprits, and they're working free. Today they're mounting a fight-back campaign. In all these 4 commissions, not one person has broken down in tears and said, I've stolen, I've been caught, I am sorry, I'm prepared to serve my time. All of them, they are saying, I did nothing wrong. In fact, I was acting in the best interest of the country. When we know that not only are they rotting to the core, but actually the intent was thieving and stealing.
Professor Mohale, we are well into news time, but I can't let you go without a final quick remark on the role of the private sector in all of this. Because we have seen, it has been proven, the private sector are not innocent bystanders. They are not paragons of virtue in this instance.
You are absolutely correct. So we saw it with McKinsey. We saw it with Bain in the consulting sphere. We saw it with SAP. We're seeing it now with Tongat. We saw it with Steinhoff. That, in fact, even in the private sector, some of the people who aided and abetted state capture are some of the people that we used to hold absolutely near and dear. I think the final message is that it doesn't matter whether in the private sector or the public sector. It doesn't matter whether you run a state-owned enterprise or a top 400 listed entities on the JSE. If you do something wrong, there must be consequence management and you must go to jail. And if you have gotten wealthy because of something that doesn't belong to you, it must go back. Otherwise, we must sell your house, we must sell your car, we must sell your clothes. If we can, let's sell your partner as well, just to send a message that it cannot be indeed in our name. Lastly, I think all of us as South Africans must say, how do we make sure that the next 26 years, we are on an upwards and forwards trajectory rather than doing things that are not benefiting our children, because we have borrowed this earth, not really from our forebears, but from our own children. Therefore, it behooves us to leave it in a condition that is substantially better than we found it in. That is leadership. Thank you.
Professor Mohale, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much. I must just state, the SABC does not condone human trafficking or the sale of human beings. Thank you so much for your time. Let's go into news now.